This next project has to do with Android applications. So something to note is that Android actually uses Java, or at least a portion of Java, as its programming language. So if you understand Java, to a large extent, you're able to create Android apps and download them directly to devices or have an emulator for your phone. So our goal for this next project is to create an Android application. And we're going to start with something that we've already done a couple of times now, TicTacToe, just so that the coding for that is not the new thing you're learning. What we're going to be looking at more is how to do layouts in Android, how to create applications, how to use the emulator, all of that kind of stuff. So this is going to be a basic 3x3 grid. You're going to be playing against a computer in this one. So you make a move, and the computer makes a move. You make a move, the computer makes a move. Dealing with wins, once again. You don't have to keep track of points, though if you want to, you may. The trick with this one is going to be that you want to check to see if you can block X from winning as the computer player. Well, actually, first you want to see if you can win yourself, and then see if you can block X, and then if you can't do that, pick randomly. And if you can play perfectly, that's better yet. Make sure you comment your code. A lot of the stuff we're going to be using is on the developer website. So if you go to developer.android.com, at the moment it looks like this. They updated a lot. Android is constantly in flux, so it may be worth going to look up the things I'm doing because there may be a new way to do it. But under develop is where I started, and underneath training there's various things for building your first app, adding various things. There's a lot of stuff about like, okay, let's say I want graphics and animation. How do I do that? Let's say that I want user info. Let's say that I want particular different kinds of inputs. How do I do all those things? So a lot of the things that I did for learning how to do Android apps, I ended up having to Google a lot of stuff. So I wanted to adjust your listener, so I had to go look up how that worked. Once you start seeing the basics of it, it makes a lot of sense. To begin with, let me start with an activity. So an activity is kind of your baseline thing that you extend in order to create an Android application. So your main class is going to extend activity. And what that gets is a series of methods that you can overwrite. So when an Android app is first launched, it runs the Oncreate method. That's where all your setup goes, kind of like the constructor for our various Java classes. It ends up running on start after that, and then on resume. And then this is where it's actually running and visible. Now it can be paused. If it's partially visible, it'll run on pause and then on resume again to go back to here. It's possible that if it's hidden, then it'll do on pause and on stop and might do restart back to here. And then on destroy destroys it. So all of these things are methods that you can overwrite and change how it deals with if it's partially hidden and whatnot. Something to keep in mind is that if your program is taking up more cycles on the phone or tablet than Android thinks it should be, Android will just kill it. So if it's taking too long to run it, or if you have an infinite loop, or there's a problem with your interface, Android will just not let you run it. It'll force close it immediately. So that's something to keep in mind. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a new Android app that has the Oncreate and sets up your grid, and I'll talk about the layout once we get there. Now, if you're programming at home, there's a couple pieces you're going to need. You're going to need to download the Android Sdk, which is the software development kit for Android. It is a big download, I'll warn you now. There's lots of pieces to it, and it takes a long time to download. But that's one piece you need. And then depending on your version of Eclipse, you might need to download something called the Android Adt. So the Android Adt, you end up having to install new software. There's a particular website you put in, and it'll install the Adt for you. Once you have those two pieces, you should have this in your menu, the Android Sdk Manager, which has to do with downloading all the updates, and an Android Virtual Device Manager. This actually creates an emulated version of whatever you're going to do. So for most of our stuff, we're going to be emulating phones. I do have some phones that we'll be using in class, but for testing purposes, you're going to want to do this. So I'm going to create a new Virtual Device Manager. So virtual devices, at the moment I don't have any, so I'm going to create a new one. So in here, I actually set up a particular test phone or tablet or whatever it's going to be. And this is where you choose what kind of thing it is. We're using this particular one here, the 480 by 854 we have Droid 2s in our class, but you could set it up to be whatever you wanted. Now this part is important and not well explained. So these are the different levels of API, which means what code has been supported at various times. So for us, 2.33 is a pretty common one. It has most of the stuff that most people need built into it. So we're going to use that particular one. You may have a newer phone which supports all the way up to like 4.2. It'll actually tell you in the settings as to what your particular device uses. And then every time that they upgrade a new API, they add more software that you're allowed to use. So I believe I think 2.33 doesn't allow gyroscopes, for example. So that's one thing we may need. So other things in here that we need to set up is what kind of chip is it using. You can say whether or not there's various hardware, the skins that are on it, whether you have cameras, what kind of memory you have, internal storage, you can put it on an SD card. So all of these things can be simulated. So you can basically set up a virtual version of any kind of device you want. And it's probably worth trying that if you eventually decide you want to do a bunch of applications on your own. So that creates the actual phone. And now I'm going to go ahead and start it. One warning, emulators are slow. Really, really, really slow. So this is going to take a few minutes to launch. So what I would do is if you're working on Android applications, come in and immediately start the Android emulator. And the other thing is don't ever close this window because you'll have to restart it and that would be slow. You can relaunch it onto the same emulator over and over again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go hide the close button over here so that I know not to turn that off. Maybe I want these things. These are the various buttons that you're allowed to use. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. It's launching still, and until I see the actual screen, this is still the launching screen. So there will be a background, and you can swipe on it and whatnot once it's actually ready to go. So while that's launching, let me go back to Clips, and I'm going to create a new Android application project. So let's see, I'm going to call this Android TTT for TicTacToe. So that's the name, that's the project name. And it has to create something called a package name. We've largely ignored this up until now, but this is the folder it puts it in. Typically this is kind of backwards from websites. So you have the name of the project, the folder it would be in, and then an extension which would be like a company or a edu if there's something like that. Here's some more things with the API. So minimum Sdk required. So if you want a particular version that it has to be able to support, this is what it eventually wants to support. I'm okay with these things. This is what it can compile with. This is the theme. You can change all of these settings if there's a particular one you want to launch on. I'm going to do the custom activity icon. This is going to be an activity, and it's going to create it in this workspace. You can have various clip art that is your launcher thing. If you wanted to create your own, you could do that. I'm fine with this default stuff. I'm just going to do a blank activity for now. And this is the name of the class it's going to make. And this is the name of the layout it's going to make. All right, so over here is all of the project that was created. And there's a lot of stuff over here. So let me start exploring what all's in here. So we do have source, just like we had before. And here's main activity.java. That's where we're actually going to run our code. So this is our basic activity project. Gen. This actually has something very important in it, which is this R file. This is the resource file, shortened to ARF because people are lazy at typing. This is going to have all of the information from anything we put into our layout. So our window, any buttons we put in, things like that. We're going to have to use this R file to refer to it. It's automatically generated. We're not going to mess with it, but we are going to have to refer to it later on. So notice over here in main activity, we're talking about r.layout.activity main. So it's using the R file to get to this particular layout. Speaking of which, let's look at layout. So what is this layout thing? So that's actually hidden down here in resources, R. So this is the folder where it's located. It's not the generated one. It's hidden in the layout folder, .layout, and activity main. So this XML file here is actually the layout. And if I go open that up, that's what this activity main is. Currently, this is what it looks at. There's a visual builder for it built into this particular version of Eclipse and Android. You can also, if you look down here, this is the graphical layout. if you look at the main.xml, this is the code that's hidden behind it. This is very much like HTML, if you've ever done that, website design. It has an opening tag called relative layout that goes from here to here. It's got a whole bunch of attributes that it's setting inside of here. It's got a text view, and then down here it closes this relative layout tag. This text view has a special thing where it has a closed slash at the end of it. So this is kind of like having an open and closed tag all in one. Whereas this one, this is the open tag, this is the closed tag. So text view is contained within the relative layout. So this is the way that you actually design interfaces in Android, is actually using these XML tools. We're actually going to use a table layout in order to set up the grid button. It's a lot like a grid layout. And then we're going to actually put buttons into that. Let's see, is there anything else we need? I think that's the basics of it. Oh, there's one other thing that we do need, which is values. A good thing to note is this strings.xml. So if I open this up, notice that there's this app name, whose value is Android TTT. Hello world is hello_world, and then here's the text for it. The reason this matters is, so you see this hello world thing. If I go back to the activity main, notice that the text in this text view, Android:text, is string with this little @ symbol, which basically means in this application. So it's going into string, this strings XML, and using hello world as the text it's going to display. It's kind of a roundabout way of putting in the thing that you're going to display on the screen. So it goes and looks up hello_world, which is this variable here, and puts this value, the thing contained inside it, back into the main text view. So let's go ahead and launch this guy and see what it looks like right now. So I'm going to run this as an Android application rather than a Java application. And what it'll do is, if I go open up my emulator again, hey look, it launched. So it's installing it right here and compiling it, and it's going to launch it. Look, hello world. So this is what my Android app looks like. Very exciting. So if I go back, you can actually treat this a lot like a phone. I can go into the applications, go look at Android TTT and launch that, and there we go. Okay. Notice I didn't close the emulator. I'm just going back and relaunching things when I need to. It's because launching the emulator takes a very long time. All right, so that's the basics of launching an Android activity, and now I'm going to go into how to actually set it up.